It begins in silence, the kind that wraps around your chest like night air, thick and still, making you wonder if heaven is listening or if your prayers have floated into nothing. It begins not with certainty but with surrender, not with strength, but with that fragile kind of hope that flickers when everything else has gone dim. Have you ever stood at the edge of yourself under the vastness of the night sky and whispered, "God, are you still with me?" Because sometimes faith isn't born in churches or crowds. It's born in the quiet ache of night when you are face to face with stars too far to touch and a promise too beautiful to believe. And yet, somewhere in that vast sky God speaks, not in thunder or earthquake but in the language of stars and soul. And tonight, we walk with Abraham into that sacred stillness, where faith began not with answers but with awe. Welcome to Midnight Psalms, where every whisper matters and every dark hour holds light. If you've come here tired, searching, aching, breathe. You're exactly where you need to be. The night has something to say to you. This is Midnight Psalms, a space for sacred echoes in the stillness, where we revisit the ancient nights that shaped the greatest stories of faith. We believe that some of God's deepest work happens in silence, when everyone else has gone to sleep and the noise of the day has faded into memory. Here you're not rushed. You're not forgotten. You're simply invited to rest, reflect, and rediscover God in the shadows. Each episode is a quiet pilgrimage into moments where souls wrestled, waited, and were reborn. It's for the wanderer with tired feet and a tender heart, the one who has questions, the one who feels unseen, and especially the one who's holding on to a promise that hasn't come true yet. So turn the lights low, let your spirit lean in, and know this: there is purpose in the pause. There is power in the night. And somewhere in this stillness, God is already speaking. The desert was silent, the wind gentle, and the sky above Abraham looked eternal. He stood there alone, outside his tent, with the dust of obedience on his feet and the weight of unanswered promises on his shoulders. The stars sparkled like ancient witnesses, too numerous to count, too far to touch, but somehow deeply personal tonight. He remembered God's words, "Leave your home, your land, your father's house, and go to the place I will show you." And he had obeyed, blindly, faithfully, painfully. Yet here he was older than ever, still waiting, still wandering, and still childless. The promise echoed in his soul, but silence had followed for years. And sometimes the silence speaks louder than the words. But Abraham didn't turn back. He didn't curse the sky. He stood there with open hands and an aching heart, because deep down he still believed. Maybe not in timing, maybe not in method, but in the voice that had called him out under that same night sky. Waiting always feels longer when time isn't on your side. Every day that passed was a reminder that Sarah's body was aging and that hope seemed biologically impossible. And yet, hope never truly dies in a soul that's heard God speak. It simply becomes quieter, more hidden, like a seed in winter. Abraham walked through lands God had promised would one day belong to his descendants, and he had none. Every empty tent post, every untouched cradle, every sunrise without laughter, it all pressed on him. He had faith, yes, but also questions. Did he hear wrong? Was he still chosen? Was delay a denial in disguise? But no matter how heavy the silence became, he stayed. Not because it was easy, but because something in him couldn't forget the way God's voice had moved his spirit all those years ago. And when your memory of his voice is stronger than your fear of the unknown, that's the beginning of real faith. On one of those cold nights, when even hope felt fragile, God returned, not with judgment, not with correction, but with a question. Abraham, look up. It wasn't an instruction to fix something. It wasn't a command to do more. It was simply an invitation to see again. He lifted his eyes, slowly, like a man remembering what wonder feels like, and above him stretched the tapestry of the universe, millions of stars against black velvet. Can you count them? God asked. So shall your descendants be. And suddenly, faith was no longer abstract. It was cosmic, tangible, lit in the sky. The same God who had flung the galaxies into place was tying Abraham's destiny to the stars. And in that moment, Abraham didn't just hear a promise, he saw it. And seeing became believing. Not because of what was already visible in his life, but because he recognized the one who makes the impossible inevitable. It's one thing to admire stars. It's another to realize they were placed there as a message just for you. For Abraham, that night changed everything, not because he had proof but because he had perspective. Those stars weren't just distant lights anymore. They were symbols of something unshakable. A God who not only makes promises but remembers them. A God who doesn't forget names or timelines or aching wombs. Abraham wasn't counting stars, he was counting on God. And in that sacred moment, faith took root. Not flashy, Not loud. Just steady, deep, quiet trust. That kind of faith is born not in miracles but in moments, when the silence stops being threatening and starts becoming sacred. And Abraham stood still under the stars, not knowing when the promise would come, but knowing the promise keeper would not fail. Faith doesn't always change your circumstances, but it will always change your posture. That night, Abraham didn't gain a son, but he gained something even more vital, a settled soul. He walked back into his tent the same man on the outside, but transformed on the inside. The stars were still in the sky, Sarah was still barren, and the years would still stretch long before Isaac arrived. But Abraham had what he needed most: confidence in the invisible. He had seen enough of God to trust him with the rest. And sometimes that's the miracle we miss. We ask for answers and God gives us anchors. We ask for clarity and He gives us courage. Faith doesn't erase the waiting, it fills it. And that night, the stars didn't just light the sky. They lit Abraham's heart. There are some promises that take decades to unfold. There are dreams we carry that outlive our own ability to make them happen. But when God writes a destiny, He also holds the timeline. The same God who set stars in motion knows when your promise will arrive. Abraham's journey reminds us that faith is a long road with short bursts of clarity. And when those bursts come, they're enough to keep going. Maybe you've had your own starlit moment, a verse that pierced your soul, a whisper in the night, a dream that felt too bold to speak aloud. Don't discard it. Don't rush it. Let it shape you. Because sometimes, God gives you a glimpse not to satisfy your curiosity, but to strengthen your endurance. The night doesn't mean He's absent. It means He's building something deeper. Where you look will determine what you believe. Abraham could have looked at his age, his circumstances, his past mistakes, or the empty space beside him where a son should have been. But instead he looked up. That simple act was everything. Because looking up isn't about optimism, it's about orientation. It's choosing to align your soul with the one who sits above it all. When your eyes are on the stars, you stop measuring yourself by the earth. You stop listening to the ticking clock and start trusting the eternal timeline. Abraham looked up and saw not just stars but storylines, descendants, nations, futures that stretched far beyond him. And so can you. Don't let your circumstances shrink your gaze. Don't let today define your forever. Lift your eyes, child of God. There's more written in your sky than you can yet see. Maybe tonight is your night to look up again. Maybe your faith has been tired, buried under disappointments, silenced by delays. But the God of Abraham is still inviting, still speaking, still using stars to awaken dreams. You don't need clarity, you need a fresh gaze. Like Abraham, you may not have the full picture, but you have a promise. And that promise didn't come from men. It came from the one who never lies. So go outside. Find a quiet space. Let the sky remind you who you belong to. Let the stillness reset your soul. The God who called Abraham is still calling. And if you listen, really listen, you might just hear Him again. Not in fire, not in thunder, but in the holy hush of a midnight sky. It's hard not to equate delay with denial. Abraham waited year after year, and every barren month whispered, maybe it won't happen for you. We do this too. We spiritualize our pain into silence, convincing ourselves that if God really loved us, it would have happened by now. But timing in the kingdom is rarely convenient. It's not shaped by urgency, it's shaped by preparation. God wasn't just building a lineage through Abraham, He was building Abraham. And the deeper the root, the stronger the tree. Sometimes the wait is not punishment but preservation. Maybe what you've called rejection is actually redirection. God doesn't withhold to hurt you, He withholds to mature you. In the slow ache of waiting, character is formed. Trust is refined. And when the promise finally comes, you'll realize that what you became in the waiting was the real miracle all along. The beauty of God's word is that it doesn't age the way we do. Our bodies slow down, our expectations shrink, but His promises remain as fresh and potent as the night they were spoken. Abraham was nearly 100 when Isaac came, and Sarah laughed, not because she didn't believe anymore but because it sounded absurd. But even our laughter, even our cynicism, cannot undo what God has decreed. What He speaks is not bound to your calendar or biological clock. It's eternal, carries the weight of heaven. So if He said it, it still stands. Maybe your promise feels like it's expired, like time has swallowed the dream whole. But God is not in a hurry because He's not unsure. His timing is never random, it's rooted in wisdom we can't see. So hold fast. He is not slow, He is intentional. And He is never late. Faith doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's a whisper that says, I'm still here. Abraham didn't preach to the stars or demand a sign that night. He simply stood in the presence of the one who called him. No proof, no plan, just a quiet yes. And that yes echoed into generations. It's easy to think our belief needs to be loud to be real. But heaven listens to the heart, not the volume. God doesn't need your performance, He wants your posture. A soul turned toward Him in quiet trust has more weight than 1,000 noisy declarations. Faith isn't about hype, it's about holding on. About showing up again and again even when nothing seems to change. Abraham's legacy didn't begin with a miracle, it began with a decision. A quiet, personal yes to a God who never forgets. One of the most powerful truths of Abraham's story is that his faith outlived him. He never saw the full unfolding of what God had promised. He saw Isaac, yes, but not the stars come true. He died with the promise still blooming, not finished. That means faith isn't just about your lifetime, it's about your legacy. What if what you're believing for isn't just for you? What if your midnight prayers are shaping generations you'll never meet? Abraham believed beyond what he could witness, and because of that, you and I are here. His faith became our foundation. Sometimes we plant seeds we'll never sit under. But that doesn't mean the seed isn't sacred. Believe anyway, trust anyway, build anyway. Because the God of Abraham is still writing stories that stretch into eternity. There's something holy about a sky full of stars. Maybe it's the stillness. Maybe it's the way we're reminded how small we are, and how deeply seen we still feel. When Abraham looked up, he wasn't escaping earth, he was connecting to heaven. And maybe we need more of that. Less scrolling, more staring. Less rushing, more resting. Because in those quiet spaces, under ancient light, our souls realign. The stars don't speak in words, but they testify. Of beauty, of order, of promise, and of a God who orchestrates everything with purpose. So when life feels chaotic, or dreams feel delayed, or silence feels unbearable, step outside. Let the night minister to your heart. You don't need answers. You need wonder. There is a loneliness in waiting that can convince you you're invisible. Abraham must have felt that, wandering through foreign lands, wondering when and how God would show up. But just because it's quiet doesn't mean God has left. Silence is not absence. The same God who set stars in place was tracing Abraham's every step. And He's doing the same for you. Your story isn't on pause, it's in progress. Even when you can't see the movement. Even when nothing looks different. The God of midnight covenants is still near. And maybe you haven't been forgotten. Maybe you're being set apart. Prepared. Strengthened. Loved in silence. He is closer than you think even when He feels far. The night isn't just a place of waiting, it's often a place of redirection. Abraham's journey didn't begin in daylight, it began in obedience beneath stars. In Scripture, night often marks divine intervention. Jacob wrestled at night. Samuel heard God at night. Paul had visions in the dark. Nicodemus sought Jesus by night. And Abraham stood beneath a sky where his destiny was unveiled. Darkness is not always danger. Sometimes it's invitation. An invitation to hear God differently. To trust Him more deeply. To detach from the noise and reconnect to the voice. If your path has shifted or your map feels unclear, don't panic. God often reroutes us in silence, not storms. He knows how to find you in the dark. Even when you doubt it. Even when others laugh. Even when your own heart wants to give up, the promise still holds. Not because you're holding it so well, but because He is. Abraham wavered. Sarah laughed. They tried to make the promise happen their way. But God wasn't offended, He was faithful. He didn't retract His word. He reminded them of it. Again and again. And He will remind you too. Because He's not asking you to be perfect. He's asking you to believe. To stay open. To keep showing up. The promise may feel heavy, but it was never meant to be carried alone. You hold it with the one who made it. And He never breaks what He blesses. You and Abraham aren't that different. You both stand under the same sky, carrying invisible promises, with a heart that wonders, will it ever come true? But you are not alone. The same God who painted that sky for Abraham has not changed. He still speaks through beauty. He still whispers through silence. He still calls you by name. And He still uses nights like this to reset your spirit. So as you listen, breathe. Let the stars remind you that your faith is part of something much bigger than your moment. You are part of a story that spans eternity. You are seen. You are loved. And your midnight matters. Tonight, don't rush to the next thing. Sit in this moment. Let it sink deep. Maybe you want to whisper a simple prayer, God, I still believe. Or maybe you need to step outside and look up. Do it. Let the stars remind you of what's still possible. Let your heart say yes again, even quietly. If this word touched you, consider subscribing to Midnight Psalms. Share it with someone who's waiting too. But above all, rest in this truth. Your night is not wasted. Your silence is not empty. God is still here. And He's still writing your story, one star, one breath, one promise at a time.